Still single, Catherine? The words cut through the London ballroom like a blade, precisely designed to wound. Catherine Winters turned slowly from her conversation with Lady Pemberton to face the source of that familiar, condescending voice. Edmund Hartley stood before her, resplendent in evening clothes that likely cost more than her quarterly allowance, his new wife Abigail hanging on his arm like an expensive ornament. Abigail, formerly Miss Peterson, looked as smug as a cat who'd discovered an unguarded cream pitcher. "How unfortunate," Abigail said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. 3 years since your broken engagement and still no prospects? You poor thing. Though I suppose at your age the options do become rather limited. Catherine was 27, hardly ancient despite Abigail's implication. But society had its rules, and unmarried women past 25 were considered firmly on the shelf, objects of pity at best, ridicule at worst. I imagine it must be difficult, Edmund continued, warming to his theme. Catherine could see the calculation in his eyes, the pleasure he took in her presumed misfortune. Watching all your friends marry while you remain alone. Perhaps you should lower your standards? I'm sure some country gentleman might be persuaded to overlook your circumstances. 3 years ago, Edmund had courted Catherine briefly before dropping her the moment someone wealthier had shown interest. He'd been kind enough not to publicly humiliate her, at least. He'd simply stopped calling, stopped writing, and married Abigail Peterson within 6 months. Catherine had been heartbroken at the time. Now, looking at his smug face and Abigail's triumphant expression, she felt only mild irritation and the sudden, overwhelming urge to laugh, because Edmund Hartley and his social climbing wife had absolutely no idea who she actually was. "Your concern is touching," Catherine said, her voice perfectly polite, "though I assure you my circumstances are quite comfortable." "Oh, I'm sure you've learned to be content with your situation," Abigail said, patting Catherine's arm with false kindness. "Spinsterhood can be quite fulfilling, I'm told. You have your charity work, your books. Some women simply aren't meant for marriage." "Some women," Catherine agreed, fighting to keep her expression neutral. If only they knew. If only Edmund had the faintest idea that the poor spinster he was mocking had married the Duke of Thornfield 2.5 years ago in a private ceremony so exclusive that only family and the Archbishop of Canterbury had attended. If only Abigail realized that the woman she was pitying owned more jewels than Abigail would see in a lifetime, held one of the oldest titles in England, and had just returned from a private audience with the Queen herself that very afternoon. But Catherine and her husband Alexander had their reasons for keeping their marriage private. Excellent reasons that involved international diplomacy, delicate negotiations with the French crown, and the kind of political maneuvering that required Alexander's marital status to remain ambiguous to certain foreign powers. For 2.5 years, Catherine had lived a double life. In public, she was Miss Catherine Winters, respectable spinster. In private, she was the Duchess of Thornfield, one of the most powerful women in England, and she'd done it so well that even Edmund Hartley, who'd once courted her, had no idea. "I do hope you'll join us for cards later," Edmund said, clearly eager to parade his married state before his former interest, "though I understand if you'd prefer not to. These social events must be rather painful for women in your position." "Women in my position?" Catherine repeated, and this time she couldn't quite suppress her smile. "Yes, I suppose they might be. If you'll excuse me, I see Lady Hertford signaling. Do enjoy your evening." She walked away before either of them could respond, heading toward where her husband's aunt stood near the terrace doors. Lady Hertford, one of the few people who knew Catherine's secret, looked both amused and concerned. That looked unpleasant, Lady Hertford murmured as Catherine approached. Was that the infamous Edmund Hartley and his charming wife, reminding me of my tragic spinsterhood? The irony is delicious. How much longer must you endure this charade? Alexander says the French negotiations should conclude within the month. Then we can finally announce properly. Catherine glanced around the ballroom. "Where is my husband, by the way?" "Smoking room, last I saw. Discussing something tedious with Lord Pemberton. You should rescue him. Or better yet, let him rescue you from Edmund's mockery." Catherine smiled. "I don't need rescuing. But I wouldn't mind reminding myself why I married him." She found Alexander in the smoking room, as predicted, looking magnificently bored while Lord Pemberton droned on about import tariffs. At 32, Alexander Thornton was everything a duke should be. Tall, commanding, with dark hair and gray eyes that could freeze a man at 20 paces or warm like summer rain when he looked at her. Right now, those eyes lit with relief as he spotted her in the doorway. "Gentlemen," he said, interrupting Pemberton mid-sentence, "you'll excuse me. I see a lady who requires my attention." He crossed to Catherine and offered his arm, perfectly proper. Nothing to suggest they were anything more than acquaintances, but his fingers brushed her glove in a pattern only she would recognize. Their private code. "I missed you," she pressed back. "Two short, one long. I love you." They'd developed an entire language in touches and glances over the past 2.5 years. When you couldn't acknowledge your marriage publicly, you found other ways to communicate. "You look murderous," Alexander murmured as they stepped into the hallway. "What happened?" "Edmund Hartley happened. He and his wife cornered me in the ballroom to express their deep sympathy for my tragic spinsterhood." Alexander's jaw tightened. "I could ruin him with a word." "I know. But you won't, because we have our reasons for secrecy, and revenge isn't worth jeopardizing the French negotiations. Revenge would be immensely satisfying, though. Revenge can wait another month. Besides, the look on his face when we finally announce will be worth the wait." They found a quiet alcove, tucked away from the main rooms. Not entirely proper, but then, they were married. They could do as they liked, even if no one else knew it. Alexander pulled her close, closer than propriety allowed, and Catherine melted into him. This was home. Not Thornfield House with its 100 rooms and priceless art. Not the London townhouse with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Just Alexander's arms, his heartbeat steady against her ear, his chin resting on her hair. "Tell me again why we're doing this," she murmured. "Because the French believe I'm unmarried and might be persuaded to marry Princess Marie-Louise, which gives us leverage in the trade negotiations. Because revealing our marriage now would cause an international incident and possibly restart the war. Because we're patriots who put country before personal satisfaction. We're idiots who should have eloped to Scotland and damn the consequences. That too." He kissed the top of her head. "One more month. 4 more weeks, and then I'm introducing you as my Duchess at the largest ball London has ever seen, and Edmund Hartley can choke on his champagne. Very ducal of you. I contain multitudes." Catherine laughed and tilted her head back to look at him. "Dance with me. We've danced twice already tonight. A third would cause talk. Let them talk. I want to dance with my husband." Something softened in his eyes. "When you put it that way." "Before we continue, dear listener, tell me, where are you listening to us right now? From the kitchen while preparing lunch? From the living room, taking a well-deserved break? Or perhaps from the bedroom, relaxing after a long day? Leave it in the comments. We love knowing you're here with us. And if you're enjoying this story, if the romance is touching your heart, please tap the like button right below. It helps us so much to continue bringing beautiful stories like this to you. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now. We have a new exciting story every week waiting for you. Now, let's return to our story, because you will not believe what happens next. They returned to the ballroom, and Alexander led her onto the floor for a waltz. Perfectly proper, perfectly distant. No one watching would guess they'd spent the night before tangled together in their bed at Thornfield House, or that this morning they'd had breakfast in their private sitting room while reading correspondence and arguing amiably about whether to redecorate the East Wing. No one would guess that beneath her glove, Catherine wore a gold wedding band engraved with Latin poetry, or that Alexander's pocket watch contained a miniature portrait of her, or that they'd been married for 2.5 years and were still ridiculously, impossibly in love. "Edmund's watching," Alexander murmured as they turned. "Let him watch. He has no idea what he lost, does he? Not even a glimmer, which makes this infinitely more satisfying." They finished the dance and Alexander escorted her to the refreshment table. Perfectly polite, perfectly proper. Just a duke being kind to a wallflower, nothing more. Except Catherine caught his fingers brushing her wrist again as he handed her the lemonade. 3 short taps. Tonight, she nearly laughed, as if she didn't already know they'd be leaving early, citing her headache, rushing home to Thornfield House to make up for the hours spent pretending to be strangers. "Miss Winters," Edmund's voice again, closer now. Catherine turned to find him approaching with Abigail still attached to his arm. "I've been thinking about your situation. How kind of you to think of me at all. I have a cousin, recently widowed. Not wealthy, but respectable. I could arrange an introduction if you'd like. It seems a shame for you to waste away in loneliness when there might be options, however modest." Catherine saw Alexander's hand tighten on his glass, saw the muscle jump in his jaw, knew he was seconds from saying something that would reveal everything. She touched his arm, the briefest pressure, Stand down. Your concern is noted, Catherine said sweetly, though I assure you I'm quite content with my current circumstances. Contentment isn't the same as happiness, Abigail said. You must be so lonely, Miss Winters. No husband, no children, no home of your own. Just rattling around in that little cottage, growing old alone. Catherine lived in a cottage the way Napoleon lived in a modest house. Thornfield Estate comprised 15,000 acres, 300 rooms, and a staff of over 200. She had more homes than she could count and enough jewels to ransom a small country, but Abigail didn't know that. No one did, except the handful of people they trusted completely. I manage, Catherine said. Perhaps we could take you under our wing, Edmund suggested. Invite you to some smaller gatherings. Not everyone would welcome a spinster, but Abigail and I aren't so proud. We remember when you were almost one of us? Almost one of us. As if marrying Edmund Hartley would have been some great achievement instead of the disaster Catherine now recognized it would have been. She felt Alexander tense beside her and knew she needed to end this before he did something dramatic. You're too kind, she said, but I really must. Thornfield. A new voice, crisp and aristocratic. Lord Ashford approached, nodding to Alexander. Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you'd be at Westminster for the vote. It was postponed until tomorrow, Alexander said. Lady Ashford insisted I attend tonight instead. Quite right. Man can't spend all his time on politics. Speaking of which, any truth to the rumors about Princess Marie-Louise? They say she's quite taken with you. Catherine felt Edmund and Abigail's attention sharpen. Everyone knew the Duke of Thornfield was one of England's most eligible bachelors. Wealthy, titled, powerful, and unmarried. A princess pursuing him was exactly the kind of gossip that fueled London society. Rumors are just that, Alexander said smoothly. Rumors. Modest as always, though between us, you could do worse. Alliance with France, sizable dowry, and she's supposed to be a beauty. Might be time to settle down, produce an heir. You're not getting any younger. I'll take that under consideration. Lord Ashford laughed and moved on, but the damage was done. Edmund and Abigail were practically vibrating with excitement. A princess, Abigail breathed. Imagine that. The Duke of Thornfield and a French princess. It would be quite the match. Edmund agreed, looking at Alexander with newfound respect. Then his gaze slid to Catherine, and something cruel entered his expression. Perhaps you should pursue his cousin after all, Miss Winters. Clearly, the Duke is quite out of your reach. Catherine saw the moment Alexander's patience snapped, saw him open his mouth, saw the words forming, saw 2.5 years of secrecy about to explode because Edmund Hartley couldn't keep his mouth shut. She did the only thing she could think of. She fainted. Or rather, she pretended to faint, letting her knees buckle and her eyes flutter closed, trusting that Alexander would catch her before she actually hit the floor. He did, of course. His arms came around her instantly, strong and sure, pulling her against his chest. Catherine, he said, and there was real concern in his voice even though she'd given him the warning tap. Emergency. Play along. Oh dear, someone said. Abigail, probably. Is she all right? She needs air, Alexander said. If you'll excuse me. He swept her up, actually swept her up like she weighed nothing, and carried her out of the ballroom. Catherine kept her eyes closed, trusting him to navigate, fighting the urge to smile at the theatrical absurdity of it all. He carried her to his carriage, still parked outside, set her on the seat with surprising gentleness, climbed in after her and rapped on the roof. Thornfield House. Quickly. The carriage lurched forward, and only then did Catherine open her eyes. That was dramatic, Alexander said. You were about to announce our marriage in the middle of Lady Ashford's ballroom because Edmund Hartley is an idiot. He called you a spinster, again, and suggested I was out of your reach. I am a spinster, publicly, and you are out of my reach. Publicly. She sat up, adjusting her hair. We have 1 month left of this charade. 1 month, and then we can tell the world. But if you'd announced tonight, you'd have destroyed months of diplomatic work. I know. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. I hate this. I hate pretending we're nothing to each other. I hate watching people pity you or mock you or try to arrange marriages for you when you're already my wife. I'm not fond of it either, but it's necessary. Necessary, he repeated. We keep saying that. But sometimes I wonder if we're just cowards hiding behind politics. Catherine moved across the carriage to sit beside him, took his hand in both of hers. We're not cowards. We're strategic. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. A coward would have refused to marry me because it might complicate things. You married me anyway. and then figured out how to make it work. That's not cowardice. That's courage and creativity. He looked at their joined hands, at her wedding ring visible now that they were alone. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd been honest from the start. If I'd married you publicly and damn the consequences. There would have been war, Catherine said simply. The French would have seen it as a rejection of their princess, an insult to their crown. The alliance would have shattered, trade would have collapsed, thousands would have died. So yes, we could have been honest, and paid for our honesty in blood. I know you're right. It doesn't make it easier. No, Catherine agreed. It doesn't. They rode in silence for a moment, the London streets rolling past outside. Then Alexander spoke again, quieter now. When we finally announce, I want it to be spectacular. I want everyone who ever pitied you or mocked you or thought you weren't good enough to see exactly who you are, exactly what they missed. Revenge? Justice. There's a difference. Catherine smiled. You're very good at differences tonight. I'm the Duke of Thornfield. Being pedantic is part of the job. That and carrying fainting women out of ballrooms? Only my wife. Everyone else can fall on their own. She laughed and leaned against him, breathing in his familiar scent. Sandalwood and something else, something uniquely him that she'd recognize anywhere. 1 more month, she said. 1 more month, he agreed. And then the entire world learns that the poor spinster is actually a duchess, and Edmund Hartley gets to live with knowing he courted and abandoned the Duchess of Thornfield. Delicious, isn't it? They arrived at Thornfield House, slipping in through the private entrance. The servants who knew their secret smiled but said nothing. The rest of the staff, those who believed Catherine was simply a frequent guest, had been given the evening off. In their private apartments, Catherine finally relaxed, finally let down the walls she'd maintained all evening, finally allowed herself to simply be the Duchess of Thornfield instead of poor, pitiful Miss Winters. "Help me with this dress," she said to Alexander. "I feel like I've been wearing armor all night." He obliged, his fingers skillful on the tiny buttons. They'd done this dance hundreds of times over the past 2.5 years. Stolen moments between public appearances, quiet evenings in their private world, away from the eyes of society. "Edmund really got to you tonight," Catherine observed as the dress loosened. "He's gotten to me every time I've had to watch him condescend to you. Every time he's implied you're somehow less because you're unmarried. Every time his wife has pitied you." Alexander's hands stilled on her back. "You're the Duchess of Thornfield. You're brilliant and kind and powerful, and you deserve to have the whole world know it. Soon." Not soon enough. Catherine turned to face him, the dress pooling at her feet. "Alexander Thornton, are you pouting?" "Dukes don't pout. You're definitely pouting." "I'm expressing aristocratic displeasure." "That's pouting." He pulled her close, and she went willingly, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Maybe I am pouting. Do you blame me? My wife is brilliant and beautiful, and I have to pretend she's nothing to me. I have to watch other men suggest she lower her standards to find a husband when she already has one. I have to endure rumors about French princesses when the only woman I want is right here. I'm not going anywhere. I know. It's just..." He rested his forehead against hers. "Sometimes this double life feels impossible. And yet we manage it. Every day we manage it. Because we're good at impossible things. Are we? We manage to fall in love despite you being a duke and me being nobody. We manage to marry despite a dozen reasons why we shouldn't. We've managed to keep it secret for 2.5 years despite living in a city that thrives on gossip. Yes, my darling, we're very good at impossible things. And you, dear listener, what would you do in Catherine's place? Have you lived through something similar? Do you know someone who went through a situation like this? Tell your story in the comments. We read each one with affection and love knowing your experiences. And if this story is making you sigh, smile, or even shed a tear, share it with someone special. Think of that friend, sister, or daughter who would also love this journey. Send her the link. Love is meant to be shared, isn't it? But let's return because what is about to happen will leave you speechless. The next morning, Catherine woke to sunlight streaming through their bedroom windows and Alexander's arm draped across her waist. She watched him sleep for a moment, this powerful duke who turned into something softer in these quiet morning hours. 3 years ago, she'd thought herself in love with Edmund Hartley. Now, looking back, she realized she'd loved the idea of him, the security he represented, the comfortable, respectable life they might have had. But Edmund had never made her heart race the way Alexander did, had never made her laugh until she couldn't breathe, had never looked at her like she was the most fascinating person in existence. Edmund had wanted a wife who would ornament his life, Alexander wanted a partner who would share his. There was no comparison. "You're staring," Alexander murmured, eyes still closed. "I'm admiring. There's a difference? A significant one. Staring implies I'm studying you like a specimen. Admiring suggests I appreciate what I see. And do you appreciate what you see?" "Enormously." He opened his eyes, gray and warm in the morning light. "Good, because you're stuck with me. However will I manage?" They had breakfast in their private sitting room, reading correspondence and discussing the day ahead. Alexander had meetings at Westminster. Catherine had a literacy charity board meeting, where she would attend as Miss Winters, spinster philanthropist, and carefully avoid mentioning that she was actually the Duchess of Thornfield and had just personally funded their new building. "When we finally announce," Catherine said, setting down her toast, "I want to keep working with the charity." "Of course." "No of course about it. Some will say it's inappropriate for a duchess to be so involved in common charity work. Then some will be wrong. Your work is important. I'm not marrying you to make you stop being yourself. You already married me. Then I already decided your work is important and I'm not asking you to stop." Catherine smiled. "This is why I love you. Because I state the obvious? Because you see me, really see me. Not what you want me to be, but who I actually am." Alexander reached across the table to take her hand. "I see you, Catherine. I've always seen you. From the moment we met, I've seen exactly who you are, and I've loved what I've seen. Even when I'm pretending to be a spinster, especially then. Watching you navigate this double life with such grace, it's extraordinary. You're extraordinary." A knock at the door interrupted them. Alexander's secretary entered, apologetic. "Your Grace, Lord Pemberton is here. He says it's urgent." Alexander sighed. "Show him to my study. I'll be there shortly." When they were alone again, he kissed Catherine's hand. "Duty calls. Go. I have my own meetings to attend. I'll see you tonight." "Always." Catherine prepared for her day, changing from the Duchess of Thornfield into Miss Catherine Winters. It was like putting on armor. This transformation. Different dress. More modest. Different jewelry, simpler. Different bearing, less assured. She'd gotten very good at it over the past 2.5 years. So good that sometimes she wondered which version was real. Was she the Duchess, playing at being a spinster? Or the spinster pretending to be a Duchess? Both, perhaps. Or neither. Maybe she was simply Catherine, containing multitudes, refusing to be defined by a single role. The charity meeting went well. They'd raised enough to open 2 new schools, and Catherine's anonymous donation, funneled through careful layers to hide its true source, meant they could hire additional teachers. "You're very generous, Miss Winters," Mrs. Hartford said afterward. They were distant cousins, and Mrs. Hartford knew Catherine's secret. "Or should I say, Your Grace?" "Not in public," Catherine reminded her. "Even here. Of course. Though I must say, this charade grows more complicated by the day. How much longer?" "Alexander says the French negotiations should conclude by month's end." "And then?" "And then we announce. Properly, publicly. And I can stop pretending to be poor and pathetic." "You've never been pathetic. Secretive, yes. Strategic, certainly. But never pathetic." Catherine smiled. "Tell that to Edmund Hartley. He practically offered to find me a husband last night." Mrs. Hartford laughed. "Oh, I would pay to see his face when the truth comes out. The look of sheer humiliation will be priceless. Alexander is already planning our announcement ball. He wants it to be spectacular. As it should be." The Duchess of Thornfield revealed at last. London society will talk of nothing else for months. They parted ways, and Catherine returned to her modest cottage. Or rather, the cottage that everyone believed was her home. In reality, it was one of several properties she and Alexander maintained for appearances. She spent perhaps 1 night a week there, just enough to maintain the fiction. The rest of her time she lived at Thornfield House as the Duchess. It was an exhausting double life, but necessary. And soon, it would be over. She spent the afternoon reviewing correspondence and working on an essay about women's education. Writing was something she could do as Miss Winters, and it gave her satisfaction to publish under her own name, knowing that when the truth came out, people would realize the spinster's writings had actually been penned by a duchess. Evening came, and Catherine returned to Thornfield House for dinner. Alexander was already there, looking tired but pleased. "The French ambassador finally agreed to our terms," he announced over soup. "The treaty will be signed next week." Catherine's heart leaped. "Next week? Then we can announce our marriage 2 weeks after that. I've already spoken to the Archbishop. He's agreed to host a blessing ceremony at Westminster, where we'll reveal that we've been married all along. Then a ball at Thornfield House to celebrate properly. 2 weeks. Catherine breathed. After 2.5 years, just 2 more weeks. Can you endure it? I can endure anything with you. They finished dinner and retired to their private sitting room. Alexander had parliamentary papers to review. Catherine had her essay to finish. They worked in comfortable silence, occasionally sharing comments or observations, existing in that perfect companionship that came from truly knowing another person. This was what Catherine had never had with Edmund. This easy comfort, this sense of partnership. Edmund had wanted a decorative wife. Alexander wanted a companion, an equal, someone to share his life with in all its complexity. "I've been thinking," Alexander said, setting aside his papers. "When we announce, there will be questions. Accusations, even. People will say we deceived them. We did deceive them, for good reason, but they won't all understand that. Some will be angry, especially those who mocked you or pitied you. They'll feel embarrassed, and they'll lash out. Let them. I don't want you to be hurt." Catherine moved to sit beside him. "Alexander, I knew what I was agreeing to when I married you in secret. I knew it would be complicated. I knew there would be consequences, but I also knew you were worth it. All of it. Even Edmund's mockery. Especially Edmund's mockery. Because when he learns the truth, when he realizes exactly who I am, the look on his face will be worth every uncomfortable moment." Alexander smiled. "Revenge? Justice. You taught me there's a difference. I'm a terrible influence. You're a wonderful influence. You make me braver, stronger, more myself. That's not terrible. That's perfect." He pulled her close, and Catherine settled against him, breathing in his familiar scent. 2 more weeks. Just 2 more weeks of pretending, and then they could be themselves. Fully, publicly, without reservation. She could hardly wait. We're almost reaching the end of this exciting journey. But if you love the romance of Catherine and Alexander, I have wonderful news. We have dozens of other stories waiting for you here on the channel. Breathtaking historical romances, heartwarming second chances, unlikely loves that seem impossible until they happen. Each story more exciting than the last. After finishing this one, scroll down and check out our playlists. I'm sure you'll find your next favorite story. And don't forget, activate the notification bell. That way, you receive an alert whenever we publish a new story. Because let's be honest, you already know you'll want the next one, right? Now yes, let's get to the moment you were waiting for, the ending your heart asked for. The 2 weeks passed in a blur of final preparations. The French treaty was signed with appropriate ceremony. The Archbishop confirmed the Westminster blessing. Invitations were sent for the ball, carefully worded to hint at major news without revealing what it was. London society buzzed with speculation. Was the Duke of Thornfield finally going to announce his engagement to the French princess? Was it a political appointment? A business venture? No one guessed the truth. The night before the announcement, Catherine lay awake beside Alexander, too excited to sleep. "Nervous?" he asked. "Terrified." "Excited, ready for this to be over, but also wanting to savor the last moments before everything changes. It won't change. Not the important parts. We'll still be us. Us plus the entire world knowing about us." "Fair point." He rolled to face her. "Catherine, I need you to understand something. Tomorrow, when we announce, some people will be cruel. They'll say terrible things. They'll accuse you of deception, of social climbing, of trapping me somehow. I know, and I will defend you. Aggressively, perhaps even excessively. If anyone suggests our marriage isn't real or that you're not worthy of being my Duchess, I will make them regret it. Very ducal of you. I'm serious, Catherine. I won't tolerate anyone disrespecting you. Not anymore. Not ever again." She kissed him. "I know, and I love you for it. But I can defend myself too. I've endured 2.5 years of mockery and pity. I can handle whatever comes next. I know you can. But you shouldn't have to handle it alone. I won't be alone. I'll have you. Always." The next morning dawned clear and bright. Catherine dressed with extra care, choosing a gown of deep sapphire silk that brought out her eyes. Her wedding ring, hidden for so long, now sat proudly on her finger alongside the massive Thornfield sapphire that marked her as the Duchess. They traveled to Westminster together, no longer hiding. The blessing ceremony was small, just family and close friends, but meaningful. The Archbishop spoke eloquently about the sanctity of marriage and the courage required to put duty before personal desires. When it was done, they were officially, publicly, irreversibly, the Duke and Duchess of Thornfield. "How do you feel?" Alexander asked as they emerged from Westminster to a waiting crowd of curious onlookers. Like I can finally breathe, Catherine said. Like I can finally be myself. They went directly to Thornfield House, where preparations for the ball were in full swing. Hundreds of guests had been invited. All of London society would be there, eager to learn what news the Duke of Thornfield had to share. Catherine dressed for the ball in a gown of champagne silk covered in crystals that caught the light with every movement. The Thornfield diamonds glittered at her throat and ears, unmistakable markers of her status. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate style she'd never been able to wear as Miss Winters. She looked every inch a duchess. "Ready?" Alexander asked, offering his arm. "More than ready." They descended the grand staircase together as their butler announced them. His Grace, the Duke of Thornfield, and Her Grace, the Duchess of Thornfield. The ballroom fell silent. Catherine felt every eye turned toward them, felt the shock ripple through the crowd like a physical wave. She spotted Edmund and Abigail near the refreshment table, watched Edmund's face go white, watched Abigail's mouth fall open in shock. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander said, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom, "thank you for joining us tonight. As you've just learned, I have the honor of introducing my wife. We were married 2.5 years ago in a private ceremony. Due to sensitive diplomatic negotiations, we chose to keep our marriage confidential. Those negotiations have now concluded, and we're delighted to finally share our happiness with you." The silence stretched. Then Lady Hertford began to applaud, followed by others who knew and liked Catherine. Within moments, the entire ballroom was applauding, though Catherine could see the shock and confusion on many faces, including Edmund's. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. They began the first waltz, and Catherine felt the weight of 2.5 years of secrecy lifting from her shoulders. She was free, finally, utterly free to be herself. "Look at Edmund," Alexander murmured as they turned. "He's gone purple. Very unbecoming. Abigail looks furious. Also unbecoming. You, on the other hand, are radiant. That's because I'm dancing with my husband, in public, where everyone can see. It's remarkably liberating." They finished the dance to enthusiastic applause, and immediately they were swarmed by well-wishers. Some genuine, some clearly curious, all wanting to know the details. Catherine told the story again and again. The secret marriage, the diplomatic necessity, the long wait to announce. Most people accepted it graciously, understanding that duty sometimes required sacrifice. Others were less kind. "You deceived us all," Lady Pemberton said coldly. "Let us pity you when you were actually a duchess. That's unconscionable." "I let you make assumptions," Catherine corrected gently. "I never actually claimed to be a spinster. Society decided that for me. Still, the deception was necessary to prevent a war," Alexander interjected, his voice cold. "My wife sacrificed her comfort and reputation for the good of England. That deserves respect, not criticism." Lady Pemberton paled and retreated. But it was Edmund's approach that Catherine had been waiting for. He made his way through the crowd, Abigail trailing behind him, looking ready to murder someone. "Miss Winters," he began, then stopped. "I suppose it's not Miss Winters anymore, is it?" "It hasn't been for 2.5 years, Catherine said pleasantly, "though you couldn't have known that. You let me believe. You let me pity you. Offer to find you a husband. Suggest you lower your standards." His face was red now, humiliation and anger warring for dominance. "You made a fool of me. Actually, you did that yourself. I simply didn't correct your assumptions. This is outrageous. You should have told me. Should have told everyone." "Should I?" Catherine raised an eyebrow. "Tell me, Mr. Hartley, how would you have responded if I'd announced my marriage 2.5 years ago? Would you have kept the secret? Or would you have spread it across London within the day?" Edmund sputtered, unable to answer because they both knew the truth. He would have told everyone immediately. "The Duchess and I made a difficult choice for the good of the country," Alexander said, his voice like ice. "If you can't understand that, then perhaps you should leave. This is, after all, our home, and you're here at our invitation. An invitation I'm now regretting. You can't throw me out. I'm a duke. I can do whatever I like." Abigail pulled at Edmund's arm. "Come on. We don't need to stay here and be insulted." "No," Catherine said suddenly. "Wait, I have something to say to both of you." Edmund turned back, suspicious. Abigail looked triumphant, as if expecting an apology. "3 years ago," Catherine said, "you courted me briefly before deciding someone wealthier was a better match. You did it kindly enough, and I appreciated that. But last night you mocked me. You pitied me. You suggested I was somehow less because I was unmarried. You treated me like a failure." "I didn't know," You didn't know I was a duchess. But should that matter? Should a woman only deserve respect if she has a title? If she's married to someone powerful? What about her own merit? Her own worth? Catherine stepped closer, and Edmund actually backed up. I am the Duchess of Thornfield, but I was valuable before that. I was intelligent, capable, and worthy of respect when I was just Miss Winters. Your inability to see that says everything about you and nothing about me. She turned to Abigail. And you. You spent last night pitying me, looking down at me, suggesting I'd failed somehow because I wasn't married. But I've been married this whole time, happily married to a man who values me for who I am, not what I can do for his social standing. Can you say the same? Abigail's face went white, then red. Without a word, she turned and fled. Edmund followed, looking shell-shocked. The nearby guests burst into applause. That was magnificent, Alexander murmured. That was necessary, Catherine corrected. I spent 2.5 years being pitied and mocked. I'm done being quiet about it. Good, because I love you when you're fierce. Just when I'm fierce? All the time, but especially when you're fierce. They danced again, and this time Catherine felt nothing but joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. She was dancing with her husband, in their home, surrounded by people who now knew the truth. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and curiosity. Catherine told their story until her voice grew hoarse, accepted good wishes from genuine friends and thinly veiled jealousy from others, watched Edmund and Abigail leave early, unable to face the assembled crowd. Finally, when the last guests had departed and they were alone in their ballroom, Alexander pulled Catherine close. We did it, he said. We survived 2.5 years of secrecy, and now everyone knows the truth. Everyone knows you married the poor spinster. Everyone knows I married the most extraordinary woman in England. There's a difference. Catherine laughed and leaned her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. What happens now? Now? We live our lives. Publicly. Honestly. Without hiding or pretending or maintaining exhausting double identities. We just get to be married. How terribly boring. I doubt we'll be boring. We're far too good at making complicated situations even more complicated. Fair point. They stood together in the empty ballroom, the candles burning low, the last echoes of the evening fading around them. Thank you, Catherine said quietly. For what? For marrying me. For keeping our secret. For defending me tonight. For loving me even when it was complicated and difficult and required maintaining an elaborate charade. Catherine, I would maintain 1,000 charades for you. I would keep 1,000,000 secrets. I would face down the entire world if that's what it took to be with you. You're not something I do despite difficulty. You're worth every difficult thing I've ever done. She kissed him then, long and tender, there in their ballroom with no one watching, no secrets between them, nothing but the truth of what they were to each other. Years later, when people asked Catherine about those 2.5 years of secret marriage, she would smile and say they were the hardest and most worthwhile thing she'd ever done. Hard because living a double life was exhausting, because being pitied and mocked while knowing the truth was infuriating, because pretending to be less than she was went against every fiber of her being, but worthwhile because it taught her that her value didn't depend on others knowing her status, that she was herself, worthy and complete, whether people knew she was a duchess or thought she was a spinster, and worthwhile because it gave her and Alexander a foundation of sacrifice and partnership that most couples never achieved. They'd chosen each other and chosen their duty to country, and they'd made both work through creativity and determination. Do you regret it? Their daughter would ask years later. The secrecy? The mockery? Not for a moment, Catherine would say, because it led me here, to your father, to you, to this life, and I wouldn't change any of it. And Alexander would add, besides, the look on Edmund Hartley's face when he learned the truth was worth every second of inconvenience. And Catherine would laugh and agree, because some things really were worth the wait. And so ends the story of Catherine and Alexander, a journey about hidden identities and the courage to endure mockery for a greater purpose, about finding worth in yourself regardless of others' perceptions, about partnerships built on sacrifice and trust and the willingness to do difficult things together. I hope this story touched your heart as much as it touched mine, bringing it to you. If it moved you, if you sighed, if you smiled along with our characters, leave your like. It motivates us to continue. And tell us in the comments, what was your favorite moment? What touched you most? We want to know. Each comment is read with affection. Are you missing it already? Don't worry, we have a new story coming very soon. Subscribe and activate notifications so you don't miss it. And while you wait, explore our channel. We have so many other beautiful stories waiting for you. Thank you so much for your company, for choosing to spend this time with us, for opening your heart to one more love story. Until the next journey, dear listener, may your heart always be open to love, to hope, and to the good moments life reserves for us. A warm hug, and see you soon. Claude é uma IA e pode cometer erros. Por favor, verifique as respostas. Sonnet 4.5